welcome back. Today we're talking about the evolution of renewable energy. If we take a step back, there have been multiple industrial revolutions. Depending on what you Google and research, you're finding that there have been 2, 3, 4, 5 industrial revolutions, depending on how you define it. For our purpose, let's say there have been 2 industrial revolutions and we are in the 3rd industrial revolution. Each industrial revolution is defined by significant economic changes, and these are defined by changes in the way we communicate, changes in the way we use transport or the transport modes, and thirdly, the source of power, energy that we're using. What is it, Kat? You're not making it easier to make the video, huh? The first industrial revolution started in Britain from around 1760s to around 1820s. From Britain, it spread across the world. The first industrial revolution was defined by communication with print media and telegraph, transportation using steam-powered locomotives, and coal as a new energy supply. The second industrial revolution was led by the US from 1870s to around 1900. It was defined by communication with phones, radio and TV. The form of transportation was internal combustion vehicles, and the new form of energy was cheap oil and still the use of coal. We are now in the 3rd industrial revolution. Communication via internet. Transportation is using electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles, and the preferred source of energy will be renewable energy. So now let's look at the evolution of renewable energy, and I believe that eventually there are 4 main distinctive phases. The first phase is policy dependent. So during that phase, which was in the 1980s to around 2015, there was pretty much no place on Earth where solar, wind, energy storage was competitive versus fossil fuel energy. Governments spent hundreds of billions of dollars to get to roughly 1% of the global energy was produced by solar, and roughly 4% of the world energy was produced by wind power. The second phase is defined by renewables being competitive for new power. The most important aspect of clean energy policies of the first phase was to drive down the costs of renewable energy by creating scale, by providing learning by doing, and eventually in around about 2015, this finally reaped benefits. So over this period of the first phase, renewable managed to reduce its cost by a factor of 10. And in 2015, finally, renewable, even without subsidies, was cheaper than new coal power or fossil fuel power plants. In the 3rd phase of this evolution of renewable energy will become disruptive to existing fossil fuel power plants. Now, after decades of subsidies for renewable energy, we are on the verge of a new era. An era where building a new solar power plant, a new wind power plant, in some cases even with storage, will become cheaper than running existing fossil fuel power plants. In January 2018, the CEO of NextEra, Jim Robo, he said that in the early 2020s, new solar and wind power plants would be cheaper than running existing fossil fuel power plants. In October 2018, a utility in northern Indiana, NIPSCO, reached Jim Robo's prophesied point years ahead of schedule, when it submitted a 5-year resource plan that would take the region from 65% coal-powered in 2018 to just 15% coal-powered in 2023 and 0 coal-powered in 2028, and replace virtually all of the coal power with a mix of solar, wind, storage and flexible demand. In March 2019, Florida Power and Light announced that it would retire 2 natural gas power plants and replace them with a combination of energy efficiency and the world's largest so-far battery, which will be used to charge during the day with solar power and then deliver energy during the evening peak. Meanwhile, Carbon Tracker has been producing reports after reports showing that new solar and wind power plants are cheaper than operational costs of coal and gas power plants. Consider this chart of new solar and wind cost in the US versus coal operational cost. Or more importantly, consider what Carbon Tracker forecasts for China. That new solar and wind will be cheaper than operating cost of existing Chinese coal power plants in the 2070s. McKinsey, in its Global Energy Perspective 2019, also comes to the conclusion that pretty much in every continent, renewable energy is cheaper than existing fossil fuel by the year 2030. The McKinsey chart shows in the first column a number of big industrial geographies. In the second column, it shows the share of coal and gas generation in the respective countries. Coal is depicted in blue, the gas is depicted in gray. On the right part of the chart, it shows for each of these geographies when wind and solar will be competitive versus gas and coal in the respective geographies. So if you look at Germany and Spain, this is happening right now. Both renewable energy technologies are becoming competitive versus existing coal and gas power plants. What is interesting in this energy evolution, moving from the second to the third phase was much faster than moving from the first phase to the second phase. Why is that? Because solar and wind, they had to drop by a factor of around 10. So they had to come down from a cost of around 60 cents per kilowatt hour to a cost of 6 cents per kilowatt hour to be competitive for new power plants. But they then only had to drop by an additional factor of 2 to 3 to being competitive versus new power plants now becoming competitive versus existing operational gas and coal power plants. The competitive zone is much more narrow than where solar and wind started off, where it had to be subsidized. After phase 3 of the evolution of renewables, there will be phase 4. This phase is characterized by headwinds of its own creation, basically. So renewables at that stage will have become so big and so dominant, and their share as part of the overall energy production will be so large that it will start causing their own problems. What are some of these problems? Value deflation, where renewables create so much supply at certain hours that they drive down wholesale prices. Depletion of the best sites in some regions, seasonal intermittency and unsolved problem of seasonal storage. Renewables might start facing these problems when solar power is in excess of 30% and wind power in excess of 50% of their electricity production. Today, worldwide solar is around 2 to 3% of the electricity production and wind in the range of 6-7%. So we're far from these percentages that I just spoke about. Cheap multi-hour storage will arrive before that, lowering the price of using solar to meet the evening peak and dealing with intermittency on the order of minutes to several hours. Only seasonal storage seems to be a really difficult problem, and potentially hydrogen might be a solution for that. I believe that in the third phase, which we're currently in, we're only at the very beginning. And as costs come down, I expect that we will realize that we're just at the beginning of an S-curve of accelerating renewable energy. And probably the limiting factors here will be supply of labor, land availability, regulation, financing, but I expect over the next coming 5-10 years still an explosion of renewable energy entering into the market. Especially for this region here in the Middle East, solar energy makes so much sense, and already the governments here are starting to look at how they can export their energy with potentially green hydrogen. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please press the like button and subscribe to Energy Lab.